I'm Mark Golub, and as election 2016 rolls on, the state of New York has spoken, and Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have scored decisive victories which many pundits are now claiming position both Clinton and Trump to win their respective primaries. On the Democratic side, Hillary answered those who kept talking about Sanders scoring an upset victory by defeating Sanders by double digits, 58% to 42%. And Clinton now leads Sanders by almost 700 delegates on her way to 2383. While on the Republican side, Donald Trump did even better than had been predicted, winning more than 60% of the vote for the first time, and winning all but 3 of New York's 95 delegates, though a few are still outstanding. And what may be most telling is that Ted Cruz not only lost to Donald Trump, he also lost in New York to John Kasich, who actually beat Trump in Manhattan. What also seems to go against the media analysts who've claimed that Donald Trump's appeal is very narrow, that he only appeals to white, blue-collar, uneducated males. In New York, Trump did very well among those who are not college educated, but he also won those with college educations. And perhaps most telling of all, he won among women. So the Republican Party delegate count now shows Donald Trump leads Ted Cruz by almost 300 delegates and has a chance of reaching 1237 before the Republican convention in July, but only a slim chance. For us, of course, it's also interesting to see how Trump and Clinton did among Jewish voters. And here, in the Republican Party, Ted Cruz comes out on top. In Borough Park, Brooklyn, and especially Orthodox Jewish community, where Jews are likely to vote Republican, Cruz received 57% of the Jewish vote to Trump's 38%. Though in contrast, in Brighton Beach and some of the other Brooklyn communities in which an overwhelming number of Jews are from the former Soviet Union, Trump came out way ahead, winning 79% of the vote. And as for how Jewish Democrats voted in the New York primary, Hillary Clinton is the clear Jewish choice over Bernie Sanders. Again in Borough Park, Brooklyn, more than 60% of Orthodox Jewish Democrats voted for Hillary. And in New York's 10th congressional district, where Jerry Nadler is the representative, and which has the highest percentage of Jews of all U.S. districts, 66% voted for Hillary to Bernie's 34%. Which is especially interesting in light of last week's televised Democratic debate in which Bernie Sanders criticized Israel for using disproportionate force in the 2014 war in Gaza. That statement has seemed to have repercussions throughout the American Jewish community, among both those who agree with Sanders' critique of Israel and among those who were deeply offended by it. And so this issue has become a topic of heated debate throughout the Jewish world. And one of American Jewry's foremost journalists, Ron Kampeas, who writes for the Jewish Telegraphic Agency as the JTA's Washington bureau chief, and someone you've heard many times on JBS, Ron has published a piece in the JTA under the title, How Bernie Sanders Just Became the Rabbi of the Jewish Left. Well, to amplify on the point of his piece, we're so pleased to have back on our JBS phones from Washington, the JTA Washington Bureau Chief, Ron Kampeas. Ron, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Ron, what were you trying to say in your piece?
I think what I was trying to say is that he's become an address. Bernie Sanders has become the embodiment of a movement that we've seen in any case. In terms of the emergence of J Street, the debate over how one should be pro-Israel, how young Jews should connect with Israel. Over about a week, 3 things happened that that made Bernie Sanders the embodiment of that. That people, I think that people years from now are going to look back on this and you're going to get a, you're going to come out of this election. Sanders isn't going to be the candidate, but you're going to come out of this election with an expression: Bernie Sanders Jew.
Uh-huh.
And because of what happened last week, first of all, going to Harlem, going to the Apollo, getting attacked in anti-Semitic terms, and shutting down the attacker and saying, "I'm proud to be Jewish," and getting cheers from a black audience. I think that it consolidated. I think maybe if there were anxieties on the left, and I think there were about whether Sanders was an appropriate spokesman for the Jewish left, it shut them down. Here's a guy who's just saying he's not only saying he's proud to be a Jew, but he's eliciting admiration for it from an African American audience. And I think that that's one thing that's troubled a lot of the Jewish left is the fraught relations between blacks and Jews in various periods since the civil rights era. So there's that. And then there is his hiring and firing of Simone Zimmerman. It's true that he fired her in the end because of the vulgarity-laced Facebook post that she wrote about Bibi Netanyahu about a year ago, when that was uncovered. But he did hire her. He hired somebody who was sharply critical of the establishment Jewish community and how it relates to Israel, and sharply critical of Israeli government policies. And that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. It speaks to not just a different way of speaking to Jewish communities. It speaks to a different way of conducting a campaign, because usually when you hire an outreach director, whether it's to the Jews, to the blacks, to the Hispanics, to women, to whomever, it's not somebody who's well known.
Yes.
It's not somebody who has like this. And here he's hiring somebody who's like, she becomes the news as soon as he hires her, because she's already got a profile. So it's like he's not even. The point is, it's outreach. You're trying to reach Jews who don't necessarily agree with you. But his point is, I'm trying to reach Jews. I'm trying to galvanize Jews who do agree with me. It's a very sort of it's a very modern campaign type of thing, where you're getting you're galvanizing the grassroots instead of trying to expand your campaign. And then finally there was this debate performance, and you're right. I think it played a role in his defeat in New York. I don't know how big a role it played,
right.
Certainly. But I think it played a role. But the fact is, he was unafraid to say it. He wasn't afraid to go there in terms of his criticisms of Israel, and framing his criticisms of Israel as both being Jewish. He, at the outset of his answer, he defined himself as Jewish, because he said, I was a kid when I spent time in Israel, and I love Israel. And then he also he went on to turn it against Clinton. He made it about Clinton, and that's, I mean, it would be extraordinary enough if somebody just didn't stand down from that kind of statement, that Israel's response was disproportionate. But he embraced it, and he actually used it as a weapon against Clinton.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ron, again, did you write the title, or did the JTA write the title for you?
My editors did.
I'm sorry?
I didn't write the title. I didn't
Okay.
write the
And that's normally what happens. A journalist writes, and then some editor decides what the title should be. But again, the title is How Bernie Sanders Just Became the Rabbi of the Jewish Left. Mm-hmm. Very often, we hear a distinction being made between the left and the far left. And there are many American Jews who consider them to be liberal Jews. They have concerns about Israel. They're absolutely devoted to voting Democrat and most likely for Hillary Clinton, but they don't define themselves as far left.
Right.
As far as you can tell, is Bernie Sanders at the moment appealing in all the ways you just described to the Jewish left or the Jewish far left?
I think it's he's appealing. It's not so much a far left distinction. I mean, partly it's generational. He's appealing to younger Jews. I mean, if you defined left and far left as left being two state and far left being one state, he's definitely appealing to two state Jews. I think he's resonating within the whole J Street camp, and that's a two straight pro-Israel camp. I think that that he's not appealing to the older left for sure. I mean, I think that's when you look at how, there's no actual breakdown yet. We haven't seen it of how Jews voted. But if you look, where Hillary Clinton performed strongest, as you were outlining. She performed around New York strongest, and it's probable that the Jews in New York helped contribute to her the wider margins that she got there. But look at the Jewish demographics. It's not just that they're Israel or pro-Israel. They're also older. Older people tend to favor Hillary Clinton. They're older women. Older women tend to favor Hillary Clinton. They're more educated. The more educated tend to favor Hillary Clinton. So I think that's part of it too. I mean, I would say that he speaks to. I mean, there are people who didn't necessarily vote for him that he speaks to, who are of the Jewish left, and there's people who he doesn't speak to. So I would say he appeals to part of the Jewish left, even the so-called, let's say, moderate Jewish left, or the two-state Jewish left. He definitely speaks to them.
Okay. The debate that you and I have now referenced, the problem was that there are many people who do not feel that Israel should be criticized for using disproportionate force. There are those in the Jewish community who see that phrase as a code word for a certain kind of Israel shouldn't have the right to defend itself, and that it is associated with less than a pro-Israel perspective among those Jews who disagree with it. What have you heard, and how did you react when you heard Bernie Sanders say Israel acted with disproportionate force in Gaza?
Well, I wasn't surprised, because he said it during the war in 2014, and he said it in a very different setting. He said it when he was defending Israel in a Cabot, Vermont town hall that has now been captured on YouTube, and it's definitely worth looking at, because you have pro-Palestinians in this little town hall who are yelling at him, trying to shut him down, and he's shouting back at them, saying Israel has a right to defend itself. Yes, its use of force was disproportionate. So, I mean, that was my first reaction. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised he was consistent, because right or wrong, throughout his career, he's been consistent. He accused Israel of disproportionate use of force during the first Intifada when he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont. So none of that surprised me. I mean, I think what my reaction or my interpretation, my analysis of this is this. You can take the attitude that you just described, where you count somebody who speaks like that, who refers to disproportionate force as being outside the pale, and not, it's just not worth your time dealing with somebody like that. Or you can accept the reality that this is how some people are going to view things, and then you can start using that as a way to weigh whether you should engage with that person or not. I mean, one of the interesting things I keep on thinking about following this whole Bernie Sanders thing is that when I started this particular job at JT in 2003, it was 2003 was before the 2004 election. The perception was that Jews were overwhelmingly Democratic because of the way they voted in 2000 with Joe Lieberman on the ticket. That the Jews were solidly in the Democratic camp, and I had people coming up to me, conservatives, politically conservative people, saying, don't count out the Republicans. It's silly, because you have to deal with them. You might not agree with them on a whole bunch,
yes,
but you have to deal with them. And which is of course true. I mean, that was like that was a perfectly reasonable state. As the Democratic Party evolves into one in which the views of Bernie Sanders become more mainstream, do you cut him out, or do you deal with him? And when you deal with him, do you think of him at the debate where Hillary Clinton is the antagonist, or do you think of him in Cabot, Vermont, where people who really don't want to deal with Israel, who want to destroy Israel, are or who would prefer to see not necessarily destroyed but removed, Israel becomes something that isn't a Jewish state, and he's standing up to them and saying that Israel has every right to remain a Jewish state? Do you deal with him and say, maybe this guy is an ally in that particular fight? Do you accept the reality that there is going to be this fight that's taking place on the left, and do you want to alienate the people who are best equipped to carry that debate on the left?
You bring a fascinating perspective. I'm thrilled that people get a chance to hear what you're saying. By the way, my own reaction was slightly different than yours. I always recoil when someone talks about Israel using disproportionate force. On the one hand, I believe it is factually incorrect, And I believe it is a canard used in some way to undermine the legitimacy of Israel, both its right to defend itself and its right to exist. So I'm offended. I do not believe that Bernie Sanders is anti-Israel. I don't believe he's anti-Semitic. But I believe the expression that the notion he expressed during the debate is one that is often heard by those who are not sympathetic to the very existence of the state of Israel and see Israel as the oppressor, occupying a foreign people and preventing them from exercising their own rights of self-determination and national aspirations, none of which I believe is factually true. And I also, I personally, Ron, and you may know this, I was disappointed that when Wolf Blitzer asked Hillary Clinton the same question, did Israel use disproportionate force, she couldn't say simply and clearly, of course not. She couldn't say it. On two separate occasions, Bernie calls her out on her first answer and says, you didn't answer the question. She said, well, I'll answer it now. And she doesn't answer it again. And for me, it represents something, and when I hear people explain why did Hillary not simply say, no, Israel didn't use disproportionate force, they say to me the reason is there's a growing strain within the Democratic Party of far left. And that far left represents the group that booed at the last Democratic convention when there was a decision to put the plank back about Jerusalem, and that the overwhelming applause that Sanders received when he made the comment during the CNN debate also troubles certain Jews who, by the way, also are liberal in their thinking, are going to vote for Hillary Clinton, but they are concerned that there is anywhere in the highest levels of American leadership this notion that Israel used disproportionate force. So while you make a very compelling case for how we should react, I did want to give you a chance to respond to the perspective that I have.
It's an absolutely legitimate perspective. I mean, if you look at the way that he uses disproportionate force, and it's like if you look at his Daily News, the broader Daily News interview in which he first mentioned disproportionate force, when he talks about the banks, and he talks about the big banks have to be shut down. He doesn't know how he's going to do that. He doesn't even know why he's going to do that. He's kind of thick on sloganeering. He's thick on, it's bizarre to even think about this with somebody who seems to be as deliberate and prepared as Bernie Sanders, but there's kind of a really emotional, not necessarily rational component to his campaigning, and it extends to how he deals with the financial system. It extends to how he deals with Israel. He sees hospitals being destroyed. He doesn't see the context in which they're being used as launching pads. Although, interestingly, if you look at the Cabot, Vermont video, he does understand it there. He does talk about that there, about Hamas using civilian areas to target Israel. So he has some awareness of it, but it's almost like he defaults into the conventional wisdom of the left, just as he does on banking issues. The question is, do you say, that's just so offensive, I can't deal with that, or do you say this is the language they use on this particular issue in that part of the environment, and therefore I'm not going. I'm going to engage with this person because he's probably going to be my best ally in dealing with that. I mean, there's kind of a parallel, I think, on in terms of the people who favor alliances with the Christian right on Israel issues. There are people who deride the Christian right on the left because they go to their theology, they go to how they view the Jews in their theology. But is that the point, or do you want to actually talk about what you have in common, which is support for Israel? In other words, like, it's a kind of in both cases, it's a perfect enemy, perfect being the enemy of the good kind of situation.
Okay. By the way, Ron, I meet Jews all the time across the political spectrum. Among Democratic Jews, I meet those who say all the time they're absolutely voting for Hillary, and they have their criticisms of Bernie Sanders having nothing to do with Israel, having to do with the other issues, some of which you just spoke to. And I will meet Jews of all ages who have been very turned on by Bernie Sanders. And they will say, I'll vote for Hillary if Bernie doesn't win. And I don't know who thinks Bernie will win. But in the primary, they tell me I'm voting for Bernie. I want to know whether you come across this, whether you experience the same thing I do, and what you hear. Again, I love having you on because you have access to people we don't always get a chance to talk to. You're in Washington. You're hearing a certain level of Jewish leadership. What do you experience personally, and what do you hear from Jewish leadership on the Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton debate?
Yeah, I think I hear there are concerns that about what there's definitely, I mean, across the board, what you say, there are concerns that Bernie Sanders represents this growing stream within the Republican, within the Democratic Party. The division is on how best to deal with it. But there are and then you get on the sort of J Street side of the spectrum, and there's definitely an excitement. Even on the J Street side of the spectrum, I'll hear from people who say they're voting Hillary because they prefer Hillary for a bunch of issues, but they're happy that Bernie is bringing his views to the table because they're finally coming out in the open. That's their perspective.
By the way, is that true? Do you feel that this issue hasn't been on the Jewish agenda and that Bernie Sanders somehow has raised this when Jews have pretended it doesn't exist? My own sense is I've heard this discussion since the war in Gaza. And I believe I've seen it, wonderful pieces in the JTA. So that I feel Roger Cohn's piece in the New York Times, and in some way, you should forgive me, even the JTA headline suggested something that I don't know is really true. I wanted your perspective.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, what I did in the piece was I pointed out this isn't new in other areas. Steven Spielberg, I mean, in terms of Jews who we embrace, who we love, who we take into our hearts, expressing the kinds of views that Bernie Sanders does. Steven Spielberg, when he made Munich, Steven Spielberg, despite that controversy of having made Munich, and I think there was another project that he maybe involved himself in that has stirred the same kind of controversy. Steven Spielberg's still the iconic Jewish director, right? I mean, he's the guy that we all want our kids to grow up to be. Yes. And then, Philip Roth and his peregrinations, he's still an iconic Jewish.
Sure.
Author John Stewart, very Jewish show. He brought Yiddishkeit to late night, and he's had these arguments as well. The difference is that this guy's running for president. It's never gotten to this level before where you've had the first Jew running for president, so of course it's never gotten to this level before, but it's still significant that not only is he the first Jew running for president, he's the first Jew running for president who's expressing these views and not really getting penalized for it. He's not, I mean, he was never going to win the, I don't think he's going to win the primary. I don't think he's going to win the nomination. But I don't think this detracts from his bid to win the nomination, on the other hand.
Okay. We only have a few moments left. Tell me what you're hearing now, especially after New York, about Donald Trump and whether the Jewish leadership could in fact support Donald Trump. I'm talking about the Republican Jewish leadership. Could Republican Jewish leadership support Donald Trump if he becomes the Republican nominee? Has the Republican Jewish coalition in any way taken a position? I don't believe it's done so formally, but again, you're talking to Mac Brooks, you're talking to these people. What do you think the Jewish establishment, the Republican Jewish establishment will do? What will Sheldon Adelson do if Trump wins the nomination?
Look, I don't think they're happy, but I think if Adelson was caught on a video, I don't think he intended to be made public, but he said, why wouldn't I support Trump? That was his way of putting it. They're going to support Trump for the most part. I think that the people who are never Trump within the Jewish leadership They're the intellectuals. It's a difference. I mean, I think we've spoken about this. It's actually kind of honorable if you look at it. The people who really don't like Trump, who are now backing Cruz, even though they don't like Cruz that much, but they're trying to do it to stop Trump. Their point is, you win an election, you win an election. You have to defer to that. You have to defer to somebody who observed the rules of the game and won, and then you back them. That's the party Republican Jew, and I think they are going to come around and they're going to back Trump when he's the candidate. And he's probably going to be the candidate. The ones who are going to remain opposed, I think, are the intellectuals, the people who aren't part of the party process, the people who are, the think tank people, like people who've already declared that they won't vote or they won't support Trump in any way or form whatsoever. People like Robert Kagan at Brookings, Max Boot at the Council on Foreign Relations, and Max Boot was one of the top foreign affairs advisors to John McCain in the 2008 election. But these people aren't attached to a party process. They're making their decision based on their on their philosophies. And it's different when you're in a think tank when you're within a party. And in terms of correct behavior, let's say, I think the people like Fred Zeidman, who told me big funder for George W. Bush. I really don't think he likes Trump, although he's not going to say that explicitly to me. He is backing Cruz now. But Fred Zeidman, after his candidate, Jeb Bush, got out of the race, I was asking what he was going to do. And he said, well, yeah, we shouldn't be tearing ourselves apart. Our main objective should be to defeat Hillary Clinton. And that's what a party person says. And, somebody on the Democratic side would say that as well. Certainly,
of course.
If you look on the Democratic side, the people who are being viewed as dishonorable are the people who are saying, I won't vote for Hillary if Bernie loses. That's what the Democratic Jewish establishment is saying. And why would we expect the Republican Jewish establishment to behave any differently?
Ron, you always bring superb analysis, and it is just wonderful to be able to get your thinking and your perspective. I thank you. You wrote a great piece in the JTA. You write great pieces every day, often more than one. I hope everybody picks up, goes online and reads the Jewish Telegraphic Agency and reads Ron Kampeas. I thank you so much for giving us more time. I'll continue to call you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Ron Kampeas, Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, and election 2016 is so fascinating, and we'll try to keep you abreast, especially as we focus on the issues of specific concern to the Jewish community. As always, my thanks to Sloan Copeland, our director, to JBS editor Dennis Golan, and to the producer of this edition of Election 2016, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.